I'm an American board certified OBGYN, a mom, a Muslim, and I'm talking about sex. This is the Muslim Sex Podcast. Welcome to the Muslim Sex Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sadaf, and this episode is everything you need to know about the new rules of women's health, a book written by Meghan Rabbitt. And before I get into it, a few things I want to make very clear. Of course, this is not meant to be any type of medical information. So if you have any questions about your health, make sure you go speak with your healthcare provider. And of course, if you have any questions about your religion, make sure you go speak with your friendly neighborhood religious leader. This is the Muslim Sex Podcast because I just happen to be a Muslim woman that talks about sex. So today I'm super excited to have on with me Meghan Rabbitt. Meghan, if you could please introduce yourself to the viewers and listeners that may not know who you are.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Sadaf. I am Meghan Rabbitt. I'm a longtime health journalist, and I am the author of the new book, The New Rules of Women's Health, Your Guide to Thriving at Every Age. I have written for many, many magazines, most magazines that you once saw on newsstands. So everything from Parenting Magazine, Prevention, Women's Health, Oprah, Runner's World, Yoga Journal. I've held staff positions at those magazines. And then I went freelance and I started writing always about health. I found myself writing about health for years and years. And Maria Shriver asked me to write this book for her imprint at Penguin Random House. And that's what I've been doing for the last 4 years.
I know it's been such a labor of love for you, I think, right? It's 4 years. It's a long time to be writing a book.
Yeah, 4 years start to finish in terms of the reporting and writing and fact checking and revising. And, I really health is so important. I wanted to make sure I got it accurate. And I spoke to over 100, there's 132 all female experts in this book.
Amazing.
Including yourself.
I know. I was going to say, I'm proud to say that I was one of the experts that you have in the book. So I'm really excited for that. And I'm excited for you to have it published. And thank you so much for sending me a copy. This is the book, everyone. So if you are on YouTube or if you're not on YouTube, you should get on YouTube and take a listen because I have a copy of the book right here. So, and it is, look how dense it is. Wow. It is packed with information. So I can't wait to delve into it. That looks amazing. Tell me about what inspired you to write The New Rules of Women's Health and why now, you think?
Yeah, I think why now women's health is more important than ever. I think that we are all talking about it more, which is really amazing. But I think in our collective talking about women's health, a lot of confusion can come up or misinformation. We are certainly living in an era where we are bombarded with information, and sometimes it's really hard to know what to trust, right? And so that's why I felt really passionate about interviewing clinicians such as yourself for this book to help me help readers understand what they most need to know and have it be information that they can trust. Maria Shriver asked me to write this book because she said, Meghan, we haven't had a very comprehensive women's health book in a really long time. Our Bodies Ourselves is a book that I have. My mother had it. It's an amazing resource, but it really focuses on what we now refer to as bikini medicine, right?
Yeah.
Breast health, sexual health, gynecologic health, all of very important aspects of women's health. But thankfully now we're researching female bodies in their own right? We know more about sex-specific differences. And so I really aim to include those in the book as well.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that's so important. What do you think felt broken or outdated about the way women's health is currently discussed?
Yeah, I think for so many of us, as women, we've been dismissed. We haven't always felt heard or fully seen. We get the brush off a little more frequently than our male counterparts. And so I think we are starting to see a change in that, and I think now we are feeling more confident as women to go to our providers and to say, look, here's what I know. Here are my symptoms. I want us to have a really good conversation about how you can help me, And so I think women are feeling more empowered than ever before, which I think is a real change and something that's been long overdue.
I agree with you. I think that it really helps when patients come in informed. I think that when I have patients come to me and, they're not sure how to describe their symptoms or they're not sure what they're really feeling, it makes it a little bit difficult to try to figure out what exactly is going on. But when patients come in and they're really informed and they've been reading and they've been learning and they've been listening to podcasts And then we can really have this rich discussion about, their symptoms and what can help and what may not help, and, what are the things to do. And I think that, I obviously help out everyone, and but those individuals that really come in prepared, it really makes for a more meaningful conversation, and I feel like they take more away from that visit.
Yeah, but I love what you're saying because I feel like all women deserve practitioners like you, where we go and you're actually wanting us to be informed, and I think that's amazing. Like I myself seek out clinicians, doctors, other healthcare providers who really, like, I can tell their eyes light up when I come with the information that I have.
Yeah,
And I do feel like when I show up more educated in those interactions about whatever health concerns I have, we do have a more productive visit.
yeah,
It's pretty remarkable. And I will say also on the education piece, sometimes living in a female body, we sometimes just get used to what's normal for us. And then we don't talk to our doctors like you about what's really happening. I'll speak personally here. For years, I had very debilitatingly heavy periods, and I just chalked it up to a bummer of being female. I just thought it was normal. I thought every woman had day one, day two of their cycle, and it was like a crime scene. Meanwhile, it was not normal. I probably years before I did should have raised some red flags, and I would have gotten treatment for the uterus full of fibroids that it ended up being.
mm,
So I think it goes both ways. Education not only helps us have better, appointments with our physicians, but also it helps us even know to make the appointment.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's really where your book is going to come in handy. This is something that I feel very strongly about, and I've come to this realization that women are used to pain. Right? They have pain with their periods. They have pain in labor. They have pain with contractions. They have pain in like perimenopause when they start to bleed heavy again. They have pain in postmenopause when they start to have pain with sex. And throughout the lifetime, they are so used to pain that just like you, they feel like it's normal. That's just kind of like a bummer. Like it's just something that they have to deal with. And that's why I think it's so important for us, physicians and people that have some platforms, regardless of whatever size it is, to be telling people and telling, those women that are listening that pain is not normal. And so when you have pain, it's really important to get checked out and to figure out what the cause is.
I love that you're bringing that up because something I heard from Dr. Vonda Wright when I interviewed her for the book, she said she's an orthopedic surgeon, and she said, the women patients I have are the ones who brag about their high pain tolerance.
Yeah.
She said we wear our high pain tolerance like a badge of honor. And the sad thing is that when we don't talk about our pain, we don't get treated for our pain gets worse. Right. And
100%.
so I feel like that is a major new rule. Pain, not normal, something to talk to your doctor about.
100%. And when you talk about that badge of honor, what came to me right away was when I see women that are in labor and that refuse an epidural. And I think that, that's fine. Absolutely. If you want to go without an epidural and you're having these horrible, horrific contractions, kudos to you. That's fine. And I always tell my patients, not in a mean way, but I always say, you're not going to get a medal at the end of this. Like, I don't have any type of award to give you for the pain that you are deciding that you want to go through and put your body through, right? Like, there is nothing wrong with getting an epidural. There is nothing wrong with being comfortable while you are in labor and having pain and contractions. Like, and I say this, and I can say this because my dad is from a village in Pakistan. We are not in the village, right? Like, you are not in a place where you don't have access to medicine. You don't have access to anesthesia. You don't have access. And so you do have to suffer through it, right? Like, those women that are in the villages, I feel horrible for them because they end up having, a delivery out in the field and they experience horrible pain, and sometimes they hemorrhage and they die because they start out with a low hemoglobin and they don't have the facilities there to take care of these women that come in very low and then they hemorrhage and then they can possibly die. So we are I'm in New York, so I'm like, we are in New York City. You have access to all of these things. Please avail them if you need them because they are here for you.
Yes. And we're a new generation of women. Like
Yeah,
my mother, who's in her early 70s, brags about two, natural childbirth,
yeah,
no drugs.
yeah,
And she wears that like a source of pride. And that's lovely for her. But now when we have that as our modeling, it can be really hard to unwind from that. And thankfully, we're starting to have a different conversation.
Yeah, yeah, 100%, 100%. And so when you say new rules, what are we unlearning first? What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot to unlearn about the old way we did things. We're talking about one of them right now. Women should just suffer through, pipe down, suck it up. That's something we have to unlearn. Another big trend in all of my reporting for this book was how we often feel shame around our bodies, and
Oh,
as women, we
mhm,
apologize. You probably get it all the time in the
all the
clinic. I'm so
time.
sorry I didn't shave.
Yeah,
I'm so sorry I didn't wear deodorant. Every doctor I talked to said, enough of that. There is no shame about what your body does, right? And we have to drop that. So
yeah.
those are big ones.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that another one that often comes up is that, I'm so sorry I'm on my period, I'm bleeding so heavy. Like that's not something you can control, right? Especially if you're coming for heavy menses or heavy painful periods or something like that. I mean, that's not, it's just the way it is, right? So absolutely, I think that you are totally correct in terms of like women always apologizing for their bodies.
No, I was just going to say too, another old way of doing things was not studying women. Medical devices, medical treatments for too many years were based on a male model, and we just did research in men and assumed that we could apply it to women. And that is the old way of doing things. Thankfully, we know more now. Thankfully, more research is happening, sex specific research to give us the answers we need, but oof, we got a ways to go.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. So your book looks at women's health as more than just symptoms and diagnoses. How do you define health for women today?
I think we want to feel like we're thriving. Really optimal health is feeling like when we get up in the morning, we can move through our lives from a place of optimal health. And I think that's the goal. And I think that when we're dealing with symptoms, when we're not feeling 100%, when we don't know who to see to help us, get treatment for what's not right, it can be really hard. Again, speaking personally, when I found out I had a uterus full of fibroids and I lived with those for a few years before I got treatment, I had felt like my body betrayed me. It's really hard when you're dealing with a health issue to not feel that way, I think, and to not feel really bummed out. But I think, ultimately, the more empowered we feel to talk about what's going on, the more able we are to get to that point of feeling like our best selves.
Yeah. So many women feel dismissed in healthcare and, specifically, let's say women of color. How did you, or what did you uncover about women's pain, pleasure, and intuition and regarding whether or not they still feel like it's being minimized?
Yeah, very intentionally interviewed experts who specialize in this area because I realize my privilege that as a white woman, I don't face the same kind of discrimination my peers, my counterparts who are women of color do. And I learned that very clearly. So I think the first big lesson is like, if you are feeling this, if you have a sneaking suspicion that there are microaggressions or discriminations, outright or even subtle, you're not making it up. Like, it is happening. And then what I did as a service journalist is really then ask those experts, okay, well, what do women do? Because it can be really hard to know what to do in the face of that. And a big lesson is, name it. As hard as that can be, narrate your experience, and if you don't feel comfortable doing that to the doctor, naming it in the office visit, name it to somebody else so that then you can either hopefully find different care if you have that as a possibility, or bring someone with you, bring an advocate with you, bring a partner, a best friend, someone else who can help you speak up, so that the provider knows what you're dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great advice.
What do you tell patients? Because I get curious about this. Like, do you see women who just say, like, you're the first doctor I've seen who I don't feel discriminated against, or?
Yeah, I mean, then I think, what patients will say to me is that you're the first doctor that's actually listened to me, right? You're the first doctor that isn't dismissing my symptoms. I notice that, especially because I do work in the Bronx, and I've worked there, for a few years when I do like locums, which is kind of like part-time per diem shifts and things like that. And that's what a lot of patients would say to me in the clinic, is that you are the first time, I've mentioned this again and again. They would tell me, that about their symptoms. Let's say that they're in perimenopause or that they're in menopause. And they're like, I've mentioned this to so many doctors and they've just been like, oh no, it's nothing. It's just aging, whatever. And they'd say like, well, you're the first doctor that's actually listening to what I have to say. And the first doctor that's actually giving me treatment for my, let's say, the hot flashes or, night sweats or for the heart palpitations, you're the first one to explain to me what's happening, during this time. So yeah, I mean, I think that patients have often been dismissed and, they feel so happy when they actually find a provider that will listen to them.
Yeah. And those microaggressions, that feeling of being discriminated against, we now know there's a term, it's called weathering.
Yeah,
And over the course of a lifetime, this can lead to some pretty detrimental health outcomes, right? And so
absolutely.
I think it's even more reason to feel like if you have a sneaking suspicion that this is happening to you, speak up, try to find that doctor who is finally going to listen and who you feel like is on your team.
100%. And, when you just mentioned weathering, I mean, we know that women of color tend to go through perimenopause for longer periods of time. And we know that through the SWAN study. And we know that because of this weathering, right? That's why women of color tend to go through perimenopausal, specifically African American women that tend to go through perimenopausal symptoms for at least 10 years, if not longer. And that's due to the weathering. And that's due to that DNA being affected, the telomeres being affected, being shortened, that are then causing them to exhibit perimenopausal symptoms for a longer period of time. In fact, there was a study that I read that if you looked at African American women of the same age, let's say in an African country, and then you looked at them here in the US, you would notice that there's such a significant difference in terms of health outcomes, but also the diseases that they have and diseases that they're more prone to. For example, here, African American women, we tend to see a lot of them tend to have more high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity. And it could be because one, perhaps they're not getting help when they could be getting help, right? And two, because of the systemic racism that is present. And like you mentioned, the microaggressions, right? It is causing a change in their DNA. And they say that if you follow them throughout generations, you'll see that they end up having more chronic diseases because of the way that their DNA has changed. And we see this also in the South Asian population. We see this. So South Asians make up a quarter of the world's population, but 60% of the cardiac disease in the world is in South Asians. And so when we look back at history, we know that it's due to the colonization by the British over the South Asians and the forced starvation that happened at that time that led to famine, that led to South Asians building this brown fat, increased visceral fat, which we know is a bad fat. But it was developed because that happened in their bodies because of that forced starvation. That was a way for them to survive. But now, throughout generations, you see that that increase in brown fat or the visceral fat or the bad fat actually leads to a higher risk of diabetes. And of course, other metabolic diseases such as heart disease and diabetes, and both of those. So, yeah,
Yeah.
but definitely heart disease is huge. In fact, that's one of the risk factors that the American Heart Association says for heart disease is being of South Asian descent.
Yeah. And heart disease, my gosh, that was a big surprise when I tucked into the heart health chapter. I didn't realize that our awareness as women of the fact that heart disease is our number one
Killer.
risk. Yeah, it's our number one killer, our number one real health risk when it comes to our mortality.
Yeah.
Our awareness of that fact is going down.
Oh,
So I love that you're bringing this up because I think, most of us, certainly women in midlife, we're probably not thinking heart disease should be on our radar, right? It's something that happens later. If it happens, it's going to happen to older women, not someone like if I exercise or eat pretty healthy, I don't have to worry about heart disease. Like my loud and clear message after working on this book was like, we all need to be thinking about heart disease and we need to be proactively bringing it up with our physicians if they're not talking to us about it.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. And so sexual health is often missing or whispered about in mainstream women's health conversations. Why do you think pleasure is still treated as optional rather than essential? What did you find in your research and the physicians that you talk to? I see actually that you talk to most of my friends about women. I
Totally.
know all of them. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think sadly the one word answer is patriarchy. I really think that we are living in a society in which, for years and still, women's pleasure is not focused
Yeah.
on. It's male pleasure, right? And I think it can be really hard for us as women to talk about this. I think to unpack it a little more, it's like first and foremost, we have to understand our anatomy. I think there are a lot of women, highly educated women, who don't have an understanding of what the clitoris actually looks like, that it actually looks quite similar to a penis when you actually look at an anatomical, medical illustration of it. The clitoris has a shaft, it engorges with blood. And we don't talk about this with each other. And then so why should we be surprised that our partners are not focused on that? I think it also starts with young girls. I interviewed Peggy Orenstein for the book, who's written beautiful books on boys and sex, girls and sex. And she said, when I talked to young boys for the book Boys and Sex, boys were focused on pleasure. When I talked to girls, they were focused on giving boys pleasure, not
Mm,
their own. And so it's a complicated topic. And then I think there's all kinds of other social influences that we have, religious, our upbringing. And so it's a very complicated topic, as you well know. I'm preaching to the choir here, to the expert, really. But yeah, it's important to talk about, and not talked about
100%.
enough.
100%. It's so funny that you bring up that the girls were more focused on male pleasure. And it is so funny because I was asked to speak to this teenage women's little, teenage girls group, just about like women's health and just about puberty and things like that. And so we started talking about, of course, the conversation eventually gets to sex. And so we're talking about that just a little bit, just in a very age appropriate way. And one of the moms says during that conversation. And it was just like a bunch of girls, and there were two moms there, just to kind of whatever, just to kind of feel their questions and stuff if they were too embarrassed. And one of the moms says, well, pleasure, oh, it's a woman's duty. She said it's a woman's duty to make sure that her husband is satisfied or experiences pleasure. And I said, whoa, 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 hold on. I was like, what in the world? Like she's telling these little girls, she's like, it's our obligation to make sure that, the husband is happy or something like that. And I said, you know what, actually. And she meant it, she was saying it kind of in like in a religious sense. And I said to her, I said, no, actually, Islam is very sex positive. And I said, in Islam, actually, women actually have sexual rights in Islam, if you can believe that. And there is like lots of traditions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, that where it's really encouraged for the man to actually please the woman before the man experiences pleasure, right? So basically helping her orgasm before he does. And it's so funny because like she didn't know of that either, and she didn't know of that tradition. So I just think like, to your point, that girls are like taught to focus, or, are learning to focus on the male pleasure, and their pleasure is completely ignored. And, I think it really starts with the education.
It starts with the education, and we are failing young girls
Yeah,
when it comes to sex ed, right?
100%.
I mean, I never got an education about
Oh, I
what.
didn't either. Yeah,
Oh my gosh, no. And even, then I went to college, and because I was a journalism and English and philosophy major, I never got really deep health classes
yeah,
that taught me. So I think for those of us who don't go into a medical profession, we really have to educate ourselves.
yeah.
And then so that we can educate the young ones who come behind us, the young women.
100%. And, I will say that, to your point about education, I mean, so I went through med school, right? And I didn't get anything in medical school that I can remember. All I remember is learning about the parasympathetic and sympathetic response and what happens to a penis, and, when he gets aroused and erection and orgasm. And so I don't ever remember anything about the female sexual response and what happens physiologically when a woman gets aroused. And then I went 4 years of med school residency in OBGYN. didn't get anything on sexual health, nothing, learned nothing about female sexual dysfunction, nothing about female pleasure, nothing. So that's, what is that now? Like 8 years of not learning. So med school, residency. So, right. So you're saying that you didn't learn anything. I'm telling you that I went to med school and residency and still learned nothing.
And
Yeah.
so many doctors I talk to and have interviewed say the exact same
Correct.
thing. And then what a shame, because that puts it on us to have to find doctors like you
Yeah.
who have actually gone above and beyond their training to do additional training to get the education you missed out on,
Correct.
And it's not every doctor who does that, as
Yes.
you well know,
Yeah.
as we all well know.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, so that's what happened, right? So that's why actually, so I was always interested in sexual health. And I just, for in my head, I was like, oh gosh, is this taboo for me, religiously, whatever, blah, blah. But then I worked around this whole thing. But anyways, I mean, like I had to find an organization. I did a year-long course with the University of Michigan on sexual counseling and education. I found Ishwish to learn more about, and take courses and blah, blah, blah. And I did coaching. So, like you really have to, I mean, it's only if you are like super interested, do you go above and beyond? Otherwise, you just don't. And you don't know what to say to women. Your patients are coming to you and saying, I have decreased libido and I have pain with sex and I have this and I have that and I can't orgasm. And if you're not trained to know what to look for, even what questions to ask, you're just going to you're going to be embarrassed that you don't know and you're going to dismiss it, or you're not. I mean, like doctors have such a hard time, and I'm saying this from personal experience, saying that they don't know, right? Because patients are coming to us and saying and asking us for help. And for us to say we don't know or we don't have the answer because they expect us to know all the answers, it almost is like a personal failure. And so we're so embarrassed and we're all very driven people, right? We're in medicine, it's highly competitive, blah, blah, blah. And so for us to say, I don't know, I have to go look it up is almost embarrassing and like a failure. And so you don't want to say it. So I don't know, maybe you make up stuff, right? And you don't really know.
Yeah. And I love, I'm reminded now of what Dr. Kelly Casperson has said very honestly. And I think it's on in her TED talk, which is that a patient came to her, and all Dr. Casperson knew to do was hand her a box of tissues because she was crying.
Yeah.
Because she hadn't gotten the sexual medicine education, even as a urologist, that she should have.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it's really important and brave of doctors to come out and say that we didn't get this education,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, I think that for me, in my head, what I say now is that it really takes a lot of courage to admit that, right? And I think that, but then you've done something about it, right? Like you could just say that I didn't learn it and that's it. Or you could say I didn't learn it, but now I did and here I am, and I'm raising awareness for others. So I'd love for you to say, like, how can women reclaim agency over their bodies without rejecting their values?
Yeah, I think it comes down to communication. It's understanding, and then it really is giving voice to that little niggling feeling inside. And I think that starts with whomever in your world feels like a safe space to talk about this, whatever that is for you. I think that's where we start because again, I'll speak personally, it's like if we have a suspicion that something's wrong or we feel shame about something or we don't know what an answer is, we tend to keep it bottled up inside. Right? We don't talk to anybody about it. But I will say every doctor I interviewed said, you can tell us anything. We've heard and seen everything. And so ideally you have a healthcare provider who you do feel safe talking to about this stuff. But that's what I think. It's like the more we can give words to our experience, the more we can let a little steam out of the pressure cooker and say, okay, like what's my next step? How can I get help for this? How can I drop shame or get treatment I need?
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. So what does the book say about listening to your body, especially when, let's say, medical advice conflicts with your lived experience?
Yeah. So intuition, I think as women, we have a strong intuition. And I think sometimes we've been trained to quiet that intuition and just do as we're told, be the high achiever, get the gold star, or be the good girl, whatever that looks like for you based on your upbringing and really, frankly, who we are too, So I really think that it's so important to drop that as much as we can and really say, okay, if I have a sneaking suspicion something's off, I need to follow that. I need to talk to somebody about that. Look at heart disease, for example. We know now that women's heart attack symptoms tend to be more subtle than a man's. And sometimes it comes down to this extreme exhaustion, feeling nauseated, just a little more subtle than the crushing chest pain. But often what comes with those subtle symptoms is this feeling that something is off. And so if we don't listen to that intuition, it can have major detrimental health effects.
100%. Yeah. And I love that, like listening to your body. And I think that if you, again, it's kind of what we talked about before, is that if you think that your provider is not really listening to you or not paying attention to what it is that's really bothering you, then you need to find somebody else that will actually listen to you and not dismiss you. So now, when we know that menopause is all over the place, right? Everybody's talking about menopause, everybody's talking about hormones, all that stuff. So midlife is often reframed as decline instead of transition. How do we rewrite that story of perimenopause and menopause as a time of power and not loss?
Yeah, I love this question so much because, and I'll admit, when I first worked on the menopause chapter for this book, I turned in my first draft and my editor was like, Meghan, this is like really all doom and gloom here, like this is some intense stuff. And I think it is really important for us to be honest and talk about the really hard aspects of menopause for a lot of women, right? Because for too many years, we were suffering through hot flashes and not talking about them because we just thought we had to power through, right? We were dealing with all these symptoms and not talking to our doctors about treatment. So I don't in any means want to diminish the downsides. But when I then took my editor's advice and I said, oh, let me try to figure out, talk to experts about the upsides, I discovered there's a whole lot of them. And doctors were telling me, look, menopause, the transition has really, it is this window of opportunity for us as women to step into our own, to reset things in our life that aren't working and move into a new path that is working better for us. I think on the health front, midlife is such a window of opportunity to say, where can I make little improvements that are going to pay off later? So all those lifestyle habits we hear about, like sleep and good nutrition and exercise, menopause is really an opportunity for us to say, am I hitting the mark on these various lifestyle habits? Because if we do that now, that's going to prevent us from seeing all the specialists in our 70s, 80s, and 90s, because we're not going to develop the diseases because we set a healthy lifestyle right now. And I also talked to, actually, it was a gynecologist who said to me, think about perimenopause as a white water rapid ride. You're going up, you're going down, you're riding the waves of these hormones that are going a little bit crazy, right? But once you hit menopause and you're past, you kind of often past all those really wild symptoms, and you get into the lake where it's placid and peaceful and you feel a sense of like, wow, look what I did. And now look where I am, And I thought that was a nice analogy.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I often say that midlife or perimenopause is actually a window into our future. And we often say that about pregnancy. We say that pregnancy is a window into our future. But I would say that not only pregnancy, but also, and the reason why we say that about pregnancy, OBs say that all the time, is that because the diseases that we develop in pregnancy, for example, the conditions such as diabetes, gestational diabetes, or high blood pressure, something like that, there's a chance if we don't take care that we will develop diabetes and high blood pressure later on in life, right? So I say the same thing for perimenopause because not everyone has gone through pregnancy, but everyone who's lucky enough to go through midlife will experience midlife. And those conditions that start to develop in midlife, in perimenopause, right? That is the time, that is the opportunity that we have to change that course of that disease, right? So if you start to become pre-diabetic, if you start to get high blood pressure, if you start to get high cholesterol, this is a time now to change just what you were saying to prevent those chronic conditions from happening later on in life. And so that's why I like to say that perimenopause is a window into our future. And it's really our time to, evaluate our life, evaluate specifically our health conditions, and then, make changes for the better so they don't become chronic diseases.
Yeah, it's really empowering. The way you just said that feels so empowering. It feels like hope to me.
Yeah.
It feels like
Yeah.
a real opportunity to say what's working, what's not, what do I have to look at so that my future self will thank me. And that's
Yeah.
really yeah, that's really hopeful.
Yeah, yeah. And I absolutely think of that. I think of that all the time of like, the decisions that I'm making today, will my future self thank me later on, And
I
so
love that.
that's kind of how I try to make specifically my healthcare decisions, like what am
Yeah.
I doing today? And
Yeah.
so what do you think women deserve to know about hormones that they're not told in a 10-minute doctor's visit?
Oh my gosh. I think this isn't as I'm out in the world talking about this book and certainly in audiences of women, it's the number one question. There are
Yeah.
so many questions about when can I start hormone therapy? What type should I be on? There's so much confusion. And so I think that the number one thing we have to do as women, certainly if we are wondering if hormone therapy is right for us, is find your menopause specialist, and if you can't, I'm here to tell you, I am still seeing it my OBGYN, and we are having very amazing conversations about hormone therapy for me and when it's time to start. But it's like we have to find the right healthcare team to be having these conversations because it's quite personalized. What I need for my hormone therapy is going to look different from my best friend, is going to look different from everybody, right?
Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%, especially because, it's one, I feel like there's no, you can't make a blanket statement for anyone because it's just everyone has their own health conditions. There are women that have had breast cancer, right? Can they go on hormones? Can they not? What do you need to know? What do you need to know about their pathology? What do you need to know about their cancer? Blah, 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 right? There are women that have other health conditions, can they or can they not go on hormones? So I think it's very much what you're saying, a nuanced conversation that you can't answer for people, right? They have to go to their practitioner, they have to go to their doctor to get those answers. I agree with you. Go to a Menopause Society certified practitioner that, has done a little bit of work on this, right? That they've studied, they know, they go to those conferences, they're involved in discussions about menopause and learning more about menopause. I'm really grateful I'm part of this group that of women menopause practitioners that talk about cases all the time. And so I feel really fortunate to be able to get that continuous conversation. It's almost like a continuous CME on this WhatsApp group, I mean, we're always talking about cases and what to do and what would you do here, and this patient is doing blah blah blah. So it's really amazing, and I feel really lucky to have that group of women to be able to discuss cases with. But obviously, not everyone has that group. But there are sources. There are the menopaussociety.org, excuse me, hosts, annual conferences every year. And so, if you're a practitioner, I would try to go to those. And they also offer CMEs throughout the year and lectures. And so it's really important to stay up to date. But to your point, I think it's really important to try to find somebody that will at least have that conversation with you. And I think that it's really difficult, honestly, to have that type of deep conversation in a 10-minute visit. When I see patients, for my initial visit, it's about an hour to an hour and a half. And, I'm lucky because that's the way I've structured my private practice. I
Yeah.
focus a lot on, what is it that you want? What are the goals that you want at the end, of this meeting? And how do you want to go about treating perimenopause, menopause? What is it that you really want? And so we tailor our conversation and also our treatment to that. And then a follow-up visits are an hour. So I think that 10-minute
Amazing.
visits are really, really difficult to have a conversation like that, unless you are very familiar with your doctor and they're really familiar with you and they know exactly what you want.
I think you are so right. And I think because most of us don't get the hour long
Yeah. Appointment. Yeah.
appointment, what I tried to do in my book is outline the facts most menopause specialists want us to know about
Yeah.
hormone therapy
Yeah.
so that we don't have to. I'm not saying it's a waste of time, but like the best use of my time, if it's a short visit, is not to say, tell me about the Women's Health Initiative and why we're, for years, menopause hormone therapy wasn't offered, And so it's like, no, we can understand the broad strokes, or even like, for example, I think a lot of women have questions about bioidentical hormones versus synthetic hormones. There's a section in my book on that so that at least women have a basic understanding so that when we have those 10 minutes, we can make the most of them.
I really appreciate that because I think that, like, honestly, I have had patients come to me and say, can you tell me about hormones? And I'm like, Oh my God. In 10 minutes? No.
Do you have a month, right?
I'm like, no, can you do a little bit of research and work on your own, and then I tell them to listen to my podcast. I'm not embarrassed to promote my own podcast because I'm like, I've done the work. There's, lots of podcasts and I've had so many people like everyone. I've had Dr. Louise Newsom on there, Sarah Glenn, Corinne Min, Rachel Rubin. All of these people have been on
Amazing.
my podcast. And so, there's lots of great information on here that, just take the time, you will learn a lot of stuff. And so that's why it's really important to do a little bit of research and legwork, especially like you said, if you don't have you're not lucky enough to have like an hour-long appointment with your physician, at least come prepared, at least come
Totally.
with the basics. And I think it's phenomenal that your book offers that. And that's fantastic. Yours will be another book that I refer to my patients.
I'm so glad. Yeah, because the thing is, if we're going to be empowered, we have to show up to these appointments with our doctors exactly as you're saying, prepared. We have to come with a list. We have to come prepared to talk about our family health history, our personal health history. I had one doctor say to me, she loves it when her patients make a list of all their symptoms and then go one step further and reorganize that list in order of priority in terms of how the symptoms are impacting my everyday life. Because then I can show you everything. And then you can say, oh, let me look at what's going on. Oh, these are bothering you the most. Well, I see this down here, which might be connected, which actually is the biggest red flag for me. We would never go to our tax appointment to get our taxes done without coming prepared with all of our tax documents and our and why do we think we can go to our doctors without being equally prepared?
Yeah.
And that has to change.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I agree. So, what have you learned as an editor and writer for Maria Shriver's weekly digital magazine, The Sunday Paper? And how do you feel that that's helped to amplify other women's voices?
Yeah, I mean, Maria Shriver is such a fierce women's health advocate, and I've learned a lot from her in that way. She really uses her skills as a journalist for good. And it's been a privilege to work for the Sunday paper and to really interview people who are architects of change, as Maria calls them, and I think when I am in a privileged position to be able to interview doctors and all kinds of expert sources about what they're passionate about doing and how they're changing the world, it's amazing. It's so inspiring.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, if a woman listening today feels disconnected from her body or overwhelmed by health advice, where should she start?
Yeah, I think this is so common. I can, again, speak from a personal perspective. I think it is really easy to feel disconnected. As women, we are expected to do so much. We have so much on our plates. Everyone looks to us to understand everything from what's for dinner to where we're going on vacation, and it's really easy to just go pop into go mode and not climb into our own bodies and try to figure out like, wait, what's happening for me right now? How do I feel? Am I ignoring symptoms that I shouldn't be ignoring? And so I think very basic, it sounds kind of funny, but what I try to do is just take a moment. And sometimes I'm really not good at this. And it's like once a week, I would say definitely try to do this more, but just climb in, take a deep breath and just literally put your mind inside your body and do a little scan. What's happening? How do I really feel? Not what does everyone want me to say when they ask me how I'm doing?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Doing a body scan, that's such a great idea. So, what do you hope a woman feels after reading your book, The New Rules of Women's Health?
I want every woman who picks up my book to say, oh, I got this. I have the information I need. I have the language I need to talk about my health. And therefore I feel empowered to get the care I deserve. I want us all to feel like we really can own our health and hire the right doctors, because I think we have to start thinking of it like that. We really, in an ideal world, can interview the people we want to take care of us and understand, are you part of my healthcare posse? Fire the doctors who aren't serving us, who are dismissing us, where we don't feel heard or seen, and really make sure we are working with our doctors in shared decision making to create a path forward that helps us hit optimal health.
Yeah, I love that. It's more about having medicine work for you right? And not just happen coincidentally or just, by chance, right? It's really being intentional about your health and making sure that you're getting the care that you need. So, and I love that your book seeks to empower women, which is really what this podcast is about. It's about empowering and education. And I think that all women deserve that. And, I love that your book can be a primer for women, right? That for learning about their bodies, things that they never learned on their own or never had access to. And now, they can get this book and have access to over 100 experts, right? That you interviewed, that you asked. So I think that that's fantastic. If you could rewrite one sentence women say about their bodies, what do you think that would be?
I'm sorry for fill in the blank.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for not shaving my legs. I'm sorry for not wearing deodorant. I'm sorry for fill in whatever, however you would fill that sentence. It's time that we stop apologizing for our bodies, for who we are, for how we're feeling, and talk openly and honestly about it with each other, with our doctors. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that, right? Women, stop apologizing. We don't
Yeah.
need to keep apologizing for everything. It's too much.
It's too much.
So for somebody that is listening to this and saying, wow, Meghan is so amazing. She is phenomenal. I love her book. How could they either get in touch with you or maybe, they could follow you? What would be the best way you think?
Yeah, I am on Instagram at Meghan Rabbitt. I'm trying on my Instagram to do, my own take on service journalism, where it's like my own journey through the healthcare system, and as well as my interviews with doctors. I just did a post, for example, on what I wish I read before my first breast MRI. I'm really on a mission to try to help women understand that the more education we have, the more empowered we'll feel as we navigate the healthcare system. So I'm on Instagram there. You can find me at newrulesofwomenshealth.com and reach out over email or, learn a little bit more about the book there.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so, so much for coming on and telling us about and sharing your book and the motivation behind it and how you seek to empower women. I think that that is fantastic. And I hope that more women decide to do that, because if we lift each other up, that's the way that we succeed, right? So I think that's super important. And so thank you again. And well, we are done here, and it's been real and really intimate. And remember, this is not meant to be any type of medical advice. If you have any questions about your health, please go see your healthcare provider. And until next time, this is the Muslim Sex Podcast. So thank you for listening to the podcast, and make sure you leave us a review, share and like the podcast. And if you leave me a review, I'd love to shout you out on social media. So be sure that you share it with all your friends. And thanks for listening.